When we had a snow day a couple weeks ago, it ruined some plans. So this series is supposed to be an extra week, but that kind of ruined it. So last week, for those of you who are here, we took 2 weeks of messages and we put them into one, which is why you got it here late last week. So sorry about that. I'm not really sorry. It just is what it is, right? However, I left a little bit out of both of them and I put it into this one because we got to end the series because the next series leads us up to something that's special that's coming up, which we will get to later. Actually, not later today, later in next week. But it starts a brand new series next week and I couldn't delay that, so this is where we're at. So I'm gonna give you a recap of where we were last week just to make sure that you don't feel like you were left out, and then you're gonna be fully up to speed and we're gonna jump into what today is. We've been in a series that started on our 7th birthday. We're a 7-year-old church plant that started gatherings out of Luna High School 7 years ago, January 14th, 7 years ago. We were at Ruth Hill Elementary School for about a year after the tornado kind of destroyed that piece of the campus that we were meeting in and their theater. We were at Ruth Hill for about a year, and we moved in here on Mother's Day, 2022, and we've been here, and as you can see, we're almost out of space, so we're building an expansion, a little extension out there. If you want to jump in and ask some questions about that, you're welcome to, but it's going to happen out those doors. Nevertheless, today, we're just tight. Hopefully you like the person you're sitting next to, and they showered at some point. If not, it's only an hour and a half. You'll be out of here soon, so you'll be fine. All right, let me catch you up. 167. The idea is this: 1 hour a week people. If you're a 1 hour a week, when I say 1 hour, I'm referring to a church gathering. If you're a 1 hour a week person, I would say that you're a Christian in name only, right? So there's a difference between, hey, I check a box and I go to church, and there's a difference between, hey, I'm actually gonna give my entire life to Jesus. Right? Like the idea, like what we just saw with Kenny, like that whole idea is I want to give my entire life to Jesus, not just my Sunday morning for an hour to Jesus. And there's a difference between the two. And so if you're just someone that says, hey, I go check a box, and then my life, the rest of the other 167 hours looks nothing like what that 1 hour would call us to or encourage us in that direction. Not that it has to be perfect, but if there's nothing in our mind that's even spinning that says, hey, this is important to me, then I would say, hey, you've gotten the name part right, the idea that I believe in Jesus, but at the end of the day, the Bible also tells us that the demons believe in Jesus, that they believe these things, that he's the Son of God. They believe that he lived on this earth in the first third of the first century in Roman-occupied Jerusalem. They believe that he hung on a cross. They believe that he resurrected from the dead. In fact, they don't just believe it, they know it. They watched it happen. So they believe all those things, right? So in other words, they could probably put the same moniker on the back of their jersey or front of their jersey as well to say Christian, if that's the only requirement to believe that Jesus is the Son of God, Jesus walked the earth, Jesus died on a cross, Jesus resurrected from the dead. Satan himself knows those things. He believes those things because he's witnessed those things. So if we just say, hey, church, the thing, we're no better. And it put us in any other category. Now I realize I just started like hot and heavy right out the gate. Typically, I would say something really funny at the beginning and everybody would laugh. I'm like, oh, okay, this is gonna be all right. I don't have time for that this morning. We gotta jump into it. That's where we're at. So let me give you the 167. 167, we said, hey, well, all right, that's what we wanna do. If we wanna be 167 people and not just 1 hour a week people, what does that mean? And so we broke the 167 down into 1 week last week. It was supposed to be 2. 1 week on words, 1 week on actions. We smushed them together into a words and actions talk last week. And so that's what it is. When we think and we categorize our week, words and actions, that would be where everything falls into. And so we then started doing some study and we came to some conclusions from our study last week about our words and actions. Here's the first conclusion we came to. Jesus says it this way, I can't speak. For the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. So when we talk about our words and we say, hey, what about our words and the things we communicate, the way we communicate, all the things we say throughout the week, what about that points back to that 1 hour type of person we want to be, or that 1 hour idea that we're encouraged to be in the 1 hour we gather as a church? What do our words look like? And Jesus just says it actually has very little to do with what you do on Sundays. Your words are simply the overflow of your heart. What's inside of you is what comes out of you. That's the deal. When it comes to our actions, we discover that it is through our actions that our faith breathes. Then when we take a look at our faith, and just to make sure that we're understanding this, the baby brother of Jesus, his name is James. James wrote a book that we find in the back third of our Bible. And James gives us some really great insight into faith. And I think anyone who spends a significant portion of their life with Jesus, like James does, would have a really good example of what faith looks like. And this is the way James describes faith. He says, hey, if your faith has no deeds or actions with it, it's dead. In other words, to make sure we're understanding, is if you were to look at the faith body, right? If there's no deeds associated with it, it's just a dead body. It looks like a body. You look at it, it's like, I can tell that's faith, but that faith is not breathing. That faith is a dead body. It's a corpse. The only thing that allows that corpse of faith to breathe is the actions that come from it. In other words, if there's no actions, that faith is just lying there. And your faith dead is as good as no faith at all. And that's what he's trying to say. So he said, hey, the actions let our faith breathe. It's what gives us life. And from that, if we were to begin to order our words and our actions, the question is, why would we do that? And that's the big question. We get to the place that just simply states our why matters. Our why matters. Why would you want to look at your words in the 167? Why would you want to look at your actions in the 167? Why? What is your why? And while we establish that the why matters, we also establish that our who matters most. Because at the end of the day, the who informs the why and informs the what we speak and what we do. It starts with who. And we just kind of went through an illustration where we said, hey, everybody has a who in every compartment of their life. Let's talk about your work. Who is the who that sits in that seat that orchestrates everything? Like the reason you get up and go to work, who is the who? Now, it could be your boss, and you're like, I want to impress my boss. Or it could be for financial gain. Finances sit in that who spot, and this is the reason I do what I do. I want to get a raise, and so that's why I'm going over and above. Or it could be in your family. Maybe it's your spouse. Your spouse sits in that who. This is why I get up in the morning. Or maybe for some of us, it's our kids. This is why I get out of bed in the morning, because I want them to have a better life than I have. Whatever that who is, we said, let's just do an exercise. Let's pretend for a second that in our compartmentalized pieces, whether it's work or home or friends, we were to take whoever sits in the who seat, remove them, and put Jesus in the who seat. And then we ask the question, if you were to go to work and you were to work as if you were working for the Lord and not for your boss, that Jesus was in the who seat and not your boss, would your boss and the place you work be more benefited or less benefited than when you work just for the boss? And I think it's an easy thing. Yeah, if we were to work as we were working for Jesus instead of a company, of course they get more out of us. If you were to take it to parenting, if you were to take your kids out or your spouse out and put Jesus there, would your kids benefit more or less of you as a parent? Of course, our kids would benefit more if we parented because Jesus was compelling us to. If you're in a relationship, your significant other or your spouse, would they benefit more or less with Jesus being the reason you care and love for them? So we said, hey, the who matters because the who informs the why and informs the what we do with our words and with our actions. But here's the question. That was all last week. I know. I've been struggling with this the whole time. You know what I'm saying? Did y'all notice when you got here the 9:30 was just letting out like 10:45? Yes. Sorry. So last week we talked about the who, we talked about the why, we talked about the what. But we need to get practical. Today we want to talk about the how. The how. How do we do this? I like the way the architect Christopher Wren puts it. He was the architect of St. Paul's Cathedral in London. And he told it, he illustrated it this way. He said, hey, let's go out to the construction site where the cathedral's being built. And let's go find the first bricklayer we come to. Let's find the first bricklayer we come to, and let's walk up to bricklayer number 1 and ask him, hey, what do you do? And that bricklayer is going to turn around and he's going to say, I'm laying bricks. He said, but let's walk on. Let's walk on to bricklayer number 2. And let's find bricklayer number 2 and ask him, hey, so what are you doing? That bricklayer is going to turn around and tell you, oh, isn't it obvious? I'm building a wall. He said, but let's just keep going to bricklayer number 3. And when we get to bricklayer number 3 and we ask him, hey, what are you doing? Bricklayer number 3 is going to turn around and say, I'm building a cathedral. That's the difference. They're all laying bricks, every one of them. But the mindset behind it changes everything about it. It changes why they get up in the morning. It changes what they're excited about. It changes what they're passionate about. But maybe bricklaying and cathedrals is something that we're not, maybe disattached or not attached to in our everyday world, right? Cathedrals is not something we build. Let's talk to a brake shop mechanic, right? You go to a brake shop mechanic number one and say, hey, what are you doing, right? It's like, bro, I fix cars. You go to brake shop mechanic number two, and he says, well, I mean, my job is to help people get back on the road. You go to brake shop mechanic number three, and he says, I keep people and their family and friends safe while they're on the road. Different mindset. Or let's talk about teachers. You go to teacher number one and say, hey, so what do you do? Oh, I teach kids at the local elementary school. You go to teacher number two, and they say, I help kids learn what they'll need to make sure they can graduate. You go to teacher number three, and it's, I mold our community by investing in tomorrow's leaders academically, socially, emotionally, and spiritually. Mindset. Why do you do what you do? Now, this isn't just a concept from an architect who builds cathedrals or just leadership principles across any kind of business spectrum in our current culture. This is a biblical concept. We find it in places like 1 Corinthians 10:31. It says this, so whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. That's a big statement. Like, it's not, hey, when you go to church, do it for the glory of God. It's not, hey, if you're going to give some offering or give to the poor or serve in a soup kitchen or a homeless minute, like any of those things, do those things for the glory of God. He gets down to the smallest things, like, hey, even when it comes down to eating and drinking, can we make sure we put the name of Jesus on this? He's saying, hey, when we think through what we're doing, maybe there's something more to what we do and what we say that's connected to who we want to be than just words and actions. But it's not just 1 Corinthians. We see it in Romans chapter 12, verse 1. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Now, when we hear that phrase, this is, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, that's scary because we're like, oh, we don't do sacrifices. I don't know. I mean, Indiana Jones does, but that's about as close as we're getting. Like, we're not doing that stuff here. Let's go back to first century mindset, though. Remember, Jewish people, very familiar with the sacrificial system. There were sacrifices, animal sacrifices made on behalf of themselves, on behalf of their families, and at some point, in entire groups of people, like the entire nation, there would be a sacrifice offered. And basically that mindset was just, hey, we've got something we're gonna put on the altar, and whatever we put on that altar belongs to you. You can do whatever you want with it. It's not ours anymore. And so when the author of Romans here is trying to get across that, hey, this is what we want you to do. We want you to walk around in your life the same way we would take an animal and put it on an offering as a Jewish person and say, hey, this belongs to you, God. Not just Sunday morning for an hour, not just those spiritual moments where we get to serve somebody, but all of it, I'm placing everything that I am on an altar and saying, hey, use it how you want to. This is for you. And then we have what we have from last week. We talked about Colossians 3:23. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters. It's this recurring theme. This recurring theme that says, hey, this is what we want your worship to look like. Now, what we don't have throughout the New Testament over and over again are themes that talk about what you should be doing on a Sunday morning sitting in a church facility. Like, that is not there. Now, there's moments where it says, hey, and on the first day of the week, they gathered and they broke bread, like that whole thing. There's some small descriptions. Acts 2:42 gives us a really good description of a healthy church. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and prayer. They met together in one another's homes and the temple courts. They ate together, glad and sincere hearts, and God added to their number daily those who were being, like, there's a really great descriptions. But there's not this constant theme of this is the way you worship. Gather together in a facility, close your eyes, sing some songs that are pretty catchy, and then sit down and open, like, that's not what's there. But there is a recurring theme over and over again that tends to point to worship actually doesn't take place on stages or in church facilities, but it takes place in your everyday walking around lives. And when we do that, we then get to this bonus benefit. Matthew 5, it's the words of Jesus. He says, you are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. And the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. This passage came to life for me, like really came to life for me about 12 years ago. My band was on a tour in Lebanon, and we did 2 tours there in the Middle East. And we were doing public universities and doing concerts there. And we had wrapped up one of them, and we were headed back to the hotel that we were staying in. And our hotel was kind of up this embankment. And you went, there were some switchbacks you got to get to it. And finally we get there and we get out. And what I hadn't noticed, I noticed the view during the day. But this was our first night that I was like in a place, I was wore out when we got the night before, so I didn't notice. But this night, I had full of energy, and I get out and I'm looking, and all of a sudden, this passage just, boom, it just lights up. Because we're on the side of a mountain, and if you're not familiar with Lebanon, it's right up against the sea. Beirut's right there at the sea. There's a big port there. But then the whole sea is surrounded by a mountain range, and we're on the side of one of those mountain ranges, and all of the cities that surround Beirut, all of them are on the side of a mountain. And so the mountains just lit up, like the curvature of the mountains just lit up with house lights and store lights and all kind of stuff. And so all of a sudden it's like, yeah, there's no way you could hide that. Like you can't build a wall around that to hide that light. Like there's no way you can keep people from knowing there's a city on that mountain. Because that's the way. Now you can get rid of the light. You can say, hey, no lights at night. Right? But then that's miserable. Nobody's gonna stay on the mountain. We'll find somewhere else we can turn some lights on at night. You know what I'm saying? Like we got things to do at night. They require light. You know, that's up to you. But you know what I'm saying? That's what's happening. But that's the truth. And all of a sudden, I was like, wow, that's it. Whether you're a follower of Jesus or not, I would imagine we've got some common ground with what I'm about to say. That our world at this moment, there's a lot of darkness in it. Hey, you look just across globally, man, there's a lot of darkness that happens in our world. So it doesn't take much to light the smallest match and for everyone's eyes in the room to be drawn to it. Just a little bit of light makes an enormous amount of difference in a dark space. And that's what happens when we walk out of a church gathering and say, I'm actually going to worship more in my 167 than I did in my 1. Because I realize that worship starts in my life, not on a Sunday morning. Thankfully, we have this picture that's drawn in this theme throughout what we read in the Bible, that our words and actions are more than words and actions. For 167 people, our words and actions are worship. Now, the really great thing is that in the book of Colossians, where we spend a lot of time in the back half or the very end of Colossians chapter 3, the step-by-step piece for how to get to what we talked about last week actually is the beginning of chapter 3. And I want to walk you through that this morning. We start with Colossians 3, verse 1 and 2. Here's the how. Since then you have been raised with Christ. Set your hearts on things above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things. So the very first thing right out the gate, before he gets into this list of, hey, this is how we're going to accomplish this, he says, hey, it starts with mindset. It starts with what's happening between your ears. It starts with, hey, what am I thinking about? It starts with what am I allowing my mind to kind of think and ruminate on and process. It begins with, hey, what am I filling myself with that I would allow my thoughts to sit and to soak in? And that's a really big question, because we got a lot of things on our plate. When our mind wakes up in the morning, maybe the alarm goes off, or maybe some of you are blessed to have that internal clock that's just like, boom, it hits and you don't even need alarms no more, you know what I'm saying? Like when that happens, what does your mind go to? Is it immediately starting to tackle the to-do list for the day? Because there's a lot of expectations. We got family expectations, social expectations, work expectations, personal expectations. And if there's a lot of things to check off the list, it's like, all right, how am I going to efficiently make sure all these things happen today? And the truth is, though, if all of those to-do lists are the things we think through first, then efficiency will be our goal. And I'm not sure if efficiency is better than godliness. Now, I think godliness still has plenty of room for efficiency. But I do think that if we were to substitute efficiency for godliness, we might be doing ourselves a disservice. So the question becomes, what are you thinking about first thing when you get up? What are the things that are entering into your worldview? What are the things that you're processing? What are the things that, the very first thing, the most important to you that you're processing, hey, all right, as I see the list of to-dos that just gets bigger every day, how do I want to see those things? What do I want to see in those things? Mindset. It's the same thing about the bricklayer or the brake shop mechanic or the teacher. Mindset. The truth is, the life we live begins inside of us. It's not external. It starts inside. In other words, worship actually begins inside of us. And the first step, when we ask the question, how do we pull these things off, is that our minds and our hearts have to be set on something other than earthly to-do lists. But he continues, verse 5, put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly nature, sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, and greed, which is idolatry. Because of these, the wrath of God is coming. Let me pause here for a second. Now, God gets a bad rap, especially because of verses like this, that gives a list of things that I would imagine most people are like, yeah, that's probably not good for us. Like idolatry, greed's inherently not something that we're big fans of. All those, like we have this list that we would probably agree, okay, that's probably not something Jesus wants for us or that God desires for us. And then there's this little part that says, because of these, the wrath of God is coming. And all of a sudden it's like, see, God is so hateful. He's so angry all the time. He's got a list of things he doesn't want us to do. And if we do those things, God's wrath is all we got. Let me just push back on that just for a second. Look, here's the thing. When you're God, the definition of God means that you're very self-aware, right? So he's not going to say, hey, I'm God, but I'm really not that great of a God. This disqualifies you, by the way. Like if you're a God who doesn't think you're a great God, then you don't have self-awareness. You have no idea what you're capable of. That's dangerous, you know what I'm saying? No, he's fully aware. He's also fully aware of how he set the world in motion because he created it. And he created it with some boundaries. Could he change them? Yes, but he's decided, as God, this is what I want. And that's what God's get. Like they get to decide. And so they put these things in motion that just simply said, I am perfect and I can't hang out with imperfectness at all. Like there's no imperfection that can hang out with me. And the truth is, every single one of us got some imperfection. All of us. Which means all of us are disqualified. So we can't be mad at God when he just is stating the truth. Now it's inconvenient truth. I don't really like the truth, but it is what it is. And at least he's being honest with us. What if he didn't tell us and there is a God and there's a judgment day and he gets there and says, hey, by the way, I sent my son. I didn't tell any of you about him. He died on a cross. Nobody knew it was him. All you had to do was believe in him, though he didn't tell you or ask you or no one else knew. But if you had secretly found out somehow, you wouldn't hear the wrath or feel the wrath that's about to come. But you missed it all. Boom, Then we'd be like, that's so not fair. Why didn't you tell us? If you had just told us, we would have believed in Jesus. And he might have said, no, I already tried that. Believe me, in my head, I ran through the scenarios. None of you believed anyway. You know what I'm saying? So it serves me. I just do what I want. Right? We wouldn't be okay with that either. He's just simply saying, hey, here's the reality. Here's the reality. I'm perfect. Unfortunately, y'all made decisions that have made you imperfect. It disqualifies you with a relationship with me. There's wrath coming. But, I don't want any of you to experience my wrath. And so in exchange, I gave you my only son. And he actually experienced every bit of wrath that I've reserved for you. He took it on. And it's a done deal. If you want it to be a done deal. If you don't want it to be a done deal and you think you have a plan to figure this out on your own, I'm actually going to love you so much, I'm going to give you that opportunity. But I'm already going to give you a heads up. There's no other way, and I've thought of all of them because I'm God. But if you want it to be a done deal, it's over. Wrath paid for. Wrath experienced in my only son. So he says, hey, everybody's got an issue, but I got a solution for everybody if you want it. Well, time back in, verse 7. You used to walk in these ways in the life you once lived, but now you must also rid yourselves of all such things as these: anger, rage, malice, slander, filthy language from your lips. Do not lie to each other, since you have taken off your old self with its practices and have put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge and the image of its creator. One of the most important things for us to read as we have this, I would say probably a common ground list of things that would be not what Jesus desires for us, this large list that he's created for us. I think the most important phrase we've got to see is that he uses the phrase, put them to death. Put them to death. Now, I love that language because it's aggressive, and I like to be aggressive. I like that language, and what I want you to do is just picture however you put things to death. Not you personally, we're not doing those things right, but however you would see something. So I watched a little docuseries on Napoleon Bonaparte, and there was a beheading in it. And so that's what I'm picturing right now is that little image. So whatever, it was a firing squad, you picture that. If it's, I don't know what's some other ways, gas chamber, you can picture that. Whatever it is, when you're thinking put something to death, however you would do that, put it to death. Waterboard them till they drown, I'm not sure. Whatever you do, he's saying that's what I want you to do. I want you to put sin to death, to execute it. That's his words. Execute the sin in your life. He's not PG in it. He's not saying, hey, I need you to manage the sin, okay? I need you to realize it. I need you to manage it, right? Let's dial it back a little. That's not what he says. He says, execute it. Kill it. It's incredibly violent. It's a very aggressive move that he's asking us to. He says, put it to death. Your porn addiction, put it to death. Don't try to do it less, put it to death. Your greed, constantly taking advantage of people, the way that you're cheating the system, the way that you're benefiting, causing other people to suffer, put it to death. Don't make small adjustments so they don't suffer as much and that you don't gain as much. No. Put it to death. And why is that? Because he knows us. He knows us. He knows when we try to manage our porn addiction, it can't be managed. It can't be managed. He knows when we try to manage our greed, it can't be managed. We can camouflage it, put it in the woods in the deer blind and say, pretend it's not there, but everybody knows there's a gun in there. You know what I'm saying? And if you put on a deer costume, walk through it, it's gonna get you. That's the way it is. That's the way sin works. You think you have the ability to control sin? Sin isn't yours. Your sin isn't even yours. You think you created your sin? You own your sin? No, that don't belong to you. You don't know how it was worked. You weren't there when it was born. You weren't there when it was conceived of. You don't know how tricky it is and how sly it is and how smart it is and cunning it is. You have no idea. You think you know, but you don't know. So try to manage it. But Paul's saying, look, no. Do not manage sin. Kill it. Kill it. As violently as you have to. Whatever that is to you, put it to death. The truth is, when we think through our actions and our words being worship, the truth is that sin and worship can't coexist at the same time. So there's no sin that we could be involved in this moment and also put the name of Jesus on it. Now, it is very possible for you to have moments of sin in your life followed by moments of worship. We're human beings, right? Like all of us have these moments where we slip into something like, this is not who I want to be. This is not who maybe I believed I was, but I had a really difficult day, and this is what's come out of me. And we can then have moments of worship that follow that up. That say, hey, God, I'm sorry. And God, I do believe that you know what's best. And all we can do those things. But at the same time, they can't coexist. You can't sin and worship at the same time. Your sin can't be worship. And so as we think through our own world, That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to say, hey, if we've got an even ledger sheet and the balance of good and evil in our life is equal, we don't want it to be equal so it balances each other out. We want to push the bad down and the good up. We want to become more like Jesus. The other thing I think is really interesting about the way that they approach this is what's in this next verse here, verse 12. He says, therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all these virtues, put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. I love that he gives this list that's common ground for all of us and says, yeah, this is probably not a list Jesus is okay with. And then he says, hey, just a heads up, there's wrath for this list. But there's Jesus. It's your choice. But then it's not even so much let's eliminate the bad things. He uses this phrase, put on, like you're putting on a jacket, like you're getting dressed in the morning, which tells us a couple of things. First thing, the list of things that he says, remember we go back and read just a little bit of it. He says, put on compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience, right? In other words, he's acknowledging that for a lot of us, we're not gonna wake up in the morning just spitting gentleness and patience. Like it's not gonna be in us. It's gonna have to be something. We gotta go to the closet and open up the closet and say, all right, I need to put on a patience jacket today. It's not naturally who I am, but I can clothe myself in it today. All right, I'm put some pants on. I'm gonna put some humility pants on today. Right? Humility pants going on, patience shoes, whatever it is, that we can clothe ourselves with that. In other words, when you wake up in the morning, you get to choose what kind of day you will have in terms of how you'll respond to it. And you can prepare yourself with that. How do you prepare us? You think on the heavenly things. That you start your day by saying, hey, I already know what's in my closet because I've been thinking about that outfit for weeks. And I'm gonna believe in that. And I'm gonna make sure that, man, as I process the reality of who I am and what I want to be, that it's in my closet. It's something that's doable for me to choose. You know, I think a lot of times people think that our character as a Christian would be forced on us, but it's not. We get to decide our character. It's a choice we get to make. It's something we can put on. This also means that you can choose to change. And here's the really, really difficult part. You see, I think there's some of you that are thinking through this 167 thing and you're like, hey, you know what? I think I do need to align my 167 more with my expectations of my 1 hour a week. And I bet for some of you this afternoon, you're gonna make a call to someone that you look up to spiritually. Probably like a big brother, big sister, or mother or father in the faith kind of person. And you're gonna call them and you're gonna say, hey, so at church today, we were talking about starting your day by thinking on heavenly things. And I bet you're gonna ask them, how do you do that? How do you do that? Because we talked about it starts with a mindset. So how do you get your mind wrapped around godly things like Jesus things and not the to-do list and all those things? How do you do that? And they're gonna give you an answer. This is how I do it. And your logical step is probably gonna say, well, shoot, if it's good for them, I'm gonna try that. And it might work for you, right? You're gonna try it. And let's just say this conversation happens this afternoon, which I guarantee some of you are gonna have that conversation. And then you're gonna try to implement tomorrow morning whatever that person told you that you think is good advice. And you're gonna try it. And tomorrow morning, you're gonna wake up and you're gonna do something different. And I bet at least a couple of them are gonna say, you know what, I have a devotional or something I do in the morning. Is it okay if I just text it to you in the morning? And maybe just this week, we'll just read the same thing in the morning, right? I'll send you what I'm reading. Read it if you want or don't, it's up to you, no pressure. But just I'll share it with you. And I bet tomorrow morning they deliver and they text you that thing and you're reading the same thing as your spiritual mother, spiritual father in the faith. And all of a sudden you're reading it and they're reading it, and you made a decision like, this is good for me. Like, I'm already feeling better. But then you walk into work or whatever you got to do tomorrow, and you're walking into a group of people who do not know. You sat here, had a conversation up here, had a conversation with a spiritual mentor, followed through on some action the next morning, has started your morning different. They have no idea. They assume you are showing up the same as you were Friday. And that's a hard spot, especially when you have a reputation. And your reputation is something other than the person you want to be. You might be the gossip girl or the gossip guy. Is that, man, if I need a juicy detail, I can go to them because not only do they know it, they like to spill it. And so I'm headed their way because I got to get some stuff on what happened this weekend because I heard, but I want to hear it from somebody else. Let's talk about it. You know what I'm saying? Or maybe it's something else, but you already have a reputation. Maybe it's in your family as a troublemaker, whatever it is. You've got a reputation, and you now have to deal with the reality of the world you've created for yourself. And that's hard. And this is typically where we go off the rails. But let me go ahead and tell you how to answer when you get in that moment. Because someone's going to come to you assuming you're the same person you were Friday, and you're going to have to tell them, and this is how you answer. Say, hey, here's the deal. This past weekend, I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I know this is going to sound strange, but I'm really not proud of who I've become. Like I just did some inventory, and it doesn't make me proud. And like this conversation we're having that you just asked me about, like I don't want to be that person, and I don't know if I can stop, but I want to. And so I went to church this weekend, and I read the Bible this morning. You know, I didn't understand most of it, but I did read it. But I am at peace knowing that I don't actually have to know all the answers. And then I feel good about my decision. And I hope you'll be happy for me. And if they say, no, I'm not happy for you, put them to death. I'm just kidding, you don't put them to death. You don't do that. You don't do that. No. You put sin to death, okay? Not the sinners, the sin, okay? No, you say, I was really hoping you'd be excited. But it's all right, because the truth is I might not be excited for me either, but I do think it's the best. And you walk away. Or maybe some of you are going to be super blessed, and the response is going to be, man, I wish I could do something like that. I don't think I could pull it off. Then you might have an opportunity to say, well, maybe you and I can be imperfect together. I got this friend who sent me this thing this morning. Maybe I don't even own a Bible, right? But they sent it to me a screenshot, and I read it. I can send it to you. You can read it on your lunch break. That's how you handle it. You just got to be honest. You can't pretend that all of a sudden you were this new person on Friday. You just got to be honest. I wasn't that person on Friday. In fact, the last 10 years you've known me, I haven't been this person. But I don't want to be that person. I want to be someone different. I want to be better. And I think I've got a first step, and today's the first step, and you're the first person I've told. So here it is. And I know that's a hard conversation to have, but it's a conversation worth having, especially if you're really thinking about the 167 belonging to Jesus. Verse 15 says this, let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body you are called to peace and be thankful. That phrase, let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts. In other words, what he's saying is, let the peace of Christ govern. Let it govern. Let it create some legislation for you. Let it create some expectations for you. Let it create some standards for you. Let the peace of Christ inform your procedures in life. Let the peace of Christ create some boundaries for you. Let the peace of Christ create some protections for you. Let it govern. And when we think through our 167, when we establish the who and the why and the what, and we ask, well, how do we do that? It's about submitting our entire lives as a living sacrifice. It's about letting God govern. Verse 16. Let the message of Christ dwell among you richly, as you teach and admonish one another with all wisdom through psalms and hymns and songs from the Spirit, singing to God with gratitude in your hearts. This is huge. I know of all the things that I've read, this one is not as meaty, but I want to make sure, I'm going to read it to you again. This right here is enormous. I'll tell you why in a second. I'll read it to you again. Let the message of Christ dwell among you richly as you teach and admonish one another with all wisdom through psalms, hymns, and songs from the Spirit, singing to God with gratitude in your hearts. Now, I think it's so interesting that when he's beginning to give us a how-to to orient our 167, that the way he begins to close the how-to is using music. Songs and hymns and spiritual songs. And this is so interesting that this is at the bottom, like this is the bottom of the list. Because a lot of times in the church world, we convince ourselves that worship is what happens when we come into a church facility and we sing 2 songs before the message and 1 song at the close of the gathering. And that's what we think worship is. And in fact, I would imagine if we polled Christians around the United States and we asked them, hey, tell us what worship is, a lot of them would have something about music in it. And we would be incorrect if that was our answer. Music is not this prescribed thing in gatherings. Again, gatherings in mass in facilities on Sundays for church, it's not something that we see overly in the New Testament. We don't get these larger gatherings until much later in church history. It's much later, a few decades later in church history. There's just not a lot of it. There's not a thing that says, hey, there's 2 songs and then there's a teaching and a transition. And like there's just not that order of worship that's prescribed. But music just always seems to be this interesting piece for us. For instance, while many people would say that music is worship, the truth is, for an enormous piece of the Christian population, engaging in singing is not something that's easy or honestly wanted. I mean, just take a look around on a Sunday morning. Like there's people that are standing, like, because we're polite, we're polite. Like we're not gonna sit and throw tomatoes at the people that have prepared to lead worship on Sunday, right? Like we're not gonna do that. Like the people that stand here, we got little X's of hey, this is kind of how we spread out. Right? The people who stand in these places are the people that have prepared. Joey, thanks Joey, sounds great. The people, like we're not gonna sit there and like, oh, this is how they contribute to what our church does. This is how they use their gifts and talents. So we're not going to be disrespectful and make faces at them or just sit here and be like, can we please get this over? Like, no, we stand up, right? We stand up, we engage, we're looking at the words. Sometimes we're singing. A lot of times people don't sing, all those things, and that's fine. It's fine. Let me tell you something. Worship when it comes to singing, is an enormous spiritual discipline. It comes with a lot of maturity. Here's why. And this is illustrated in the worship wars of the 90s and the early 2000s. Because people were so convinced that music was one of the most important things when it came to our relationship with God, people would split churches over it. We would say, hey, my worship better have drums and it better be loud or I ain't doing it. And the other crew would say, hey, it better have an organ and it better have a piano and you better put a shirt and tie on or we ain't doing it. It's devil worship, them drums. You know what I'm saying? That's what I would say. The devil's in the drums. You know what I'm saying? And that's what people do. Boom, we're done. We're splitting the whole church. We're out of here. We're out of here. Here's the thing. It takes an enormous amount of spiritual maturity, and that's why I think it's at the bottom of this list, because it takes time. Because at some point, as a follower of Jesus, you come to realize that the style of worship and music doesn't matter. And I've thought about this. I haven't pulled the trigger on it because I'm nervous that they would be angry. But I've thought about just us canceling gatherings and going to one of the historical churches on a Sunday. Just saying, hey, we're not doing it at 11. We're going to do it at 11 at, Methodist across the street, right? But I'm nervous that there's a lot of people here and we would just ruin all their, they would probably be angry. But I thought about surprising them one day and just saying, here's what we're going to do. Because the truth is, followers of Jesus, it doesn't matter. If we were to go to an incredibly traditional place, for those of you who are mature followers of Jesus, It could be an out-of-tune piano in the backwoods of Alabama somewhere, and you could still worship. Or it could be drums and guitars and the greatest version of contemporary Christian music and the band, and you could worship there. Or it could be something in between with suits and ties and someone that leads with their hands like this, and there's a choir behind them in some robes, and you could worship then. And at the end of the day, being able to worship through song has nothing to do with preferences and everything to do with maturity, because you begin to realize the thing that we do in terms of music has nothing to do with your preferences. It has everything to do with hundreds of people saying the same thing at the same time. And the unity is more important than the style. That's huge. But it takes a long time to get to a place where you value unity over preferences. And you value unity and the whole church moving together, even if some people will criticize modern worship songs saying, oh, they're theologically bankrupt. Okay, all right. Well, anything other than the Bible is theologically bankrupt if you really want to get into it. And just because we set music to the Bible, like, come on, that's such a lame argument. Lame. I would love to debate somebody about it. Bring it. We'll put it on YouTube, and you'll be. I won't do that. See, I'm already being mad, being mean. But that's a bad argument. The reason we want to do something is because we want to put a lyric on screen that says, great are you, Lord. Great are you, Lord. And then we want to have 500 people singing at the same time. Not because it sounds great, because it puts us all in the same place. It says, we're not great. You're not great. You're not great. You're not great. And you're not great. When we think about God, you're great. That's it. And the value in that, oh, it's immeasurable. To move in the same direction, all at once, out-of-tune piano, hymns, rocking band, something in between, doesn't matter. But here's the thing. The truth is that our worship on Sundays doesn't inform our 167. Our 167 informs our worship on Sundays. And so if you wonder, hey, why am I not engaged in some of the things that maybe feel like church to you? Don't start there. Start asking the questions, hey, am I being the church in my everyday life in the week? Because then when you get to gather together with other people that are grinding out the reality of the Christian life, it'll be a breath of fresh air. It doesn't matter how we do it, whether there's a hazer or not a hazer, dim lights, not dim lights, windows open, not windows open, tie, no tie, whatever. It'll be like, man, this just feels good to be with people that are in the same grind as I am. Great are you, Lord. Great are you, Lord. But that doesn't happen unless we address the 167. Because you can say, great are you, Lord, in unison with 500, 600, 700 other people, and then walk out the door live like something completely different. And all you had was some entertainment or some feel-good throwback that makes your heart feel something different than it really is. I want to close by reading one verse, and it's the entire cornerstone of this entire series. Just one single verse. Colossians 3, verse 17. And whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. In other words, doesn't matter what it is, put the name of Jesus on it. That's our standard. Whatever we do, whether we say it, speak it, verbalize it, think it, do it with our hands, do it on our feet, do it with our life. Our hope is we can put the name of Jesus on it over and over and over again. Our 167 would simply be defined as for Jesus. Now, I wanted to make sure that this series was incredibly practical because we're talking about your everyday life. And so I put together a 6-day text challenge that's just a reminder. You can opt into it, or you don't have to participate. It's up to you. But what I did was Monday through Saturday, I've taken what we've talked about today, last week, and I've just written a small little thing It's got a passage of scripture that we've been reading through and a question that goes with it for you to start your day. Now, I know all of you start your day at different times, and it's uniform, and no, you cannot ask for this to come at a different time. It gets sent to you at 7:30 in the morning, and so at 7:30, you'll get a text message. It's automated. If you opt in, it's not me sitting there at 7:30 texting 800 people. It's automated. It's going to come to you, and it's going to be a part of the 167 series we've done. It's going to have a passage of scripture for you to read in parentheses. It's going to have a question with it and a little thought. It's super simple. It's not breathtaking. It's not, like this is incredible. This is the greatest thing. It's just real. It's just real. It's a question for you to begin your day with. For some of you, you'll already be an hour or so into your day. I get that. But it's something for you to kind of start your day with. If you want to do that, you can text the numbers 167 to our number. It's really simple. Let me give you a heads up. Don't text anything other than 167. If you text 167 thank you or 167 smiley face, it doesn't work because it's automated. I'm not sending these. Brooke's not sending these. It's just automated. Now, I will tell you this. While the text message is automated to you, anytime you respond to one of those automated text messages, that's live. We're really there, and we will respond to you. So if all of a sudden you've got that question and you're halfway through your day and you're in a place where you're like, this is not going well, I need someone to pray for me, just hop right back on and say, hey, I made it through half my day. It's not going well. Would you pray for me? And I give you my word. As soon as one of our staff members reads it, prayer will happen on your behalf. If you've got a question about it, and that text gets sent out, when you text back, if you're like, hey, can you clarify this for me? Remember, there's a lot of people. There's a ton of people at the 9 that opted into it. So it might take a second to get back, but I give you my word. We will respond to you as fast as we can process all of them. So it's an option for you. If you're like, no, I got my 167 down, maybe you want to grab this just to send to someone else who you want to help and coach along and be a mentor in someone's life. That's fine. Or feel free, if you've got a friend that's been asking you some spiritual questions, this would be something you could tell them. You probably need to be in the texting queue by about 7 tomorrow morning for it to work. If not, then it'll be difficult. I don't know if we can put you in afterwards. That's a Brooke question, but the easiest thing would be to do it. So if you're thinking, I don't know if I want to do this, I would just take a picture of it, and that way you can think about it the rest of the day. And if you decide you want to do it, then you can opt in whenever you want to. But that's how we want to kind of live this out this week.